see everything from this distance. Surprising.
Sibby, Sibby, I have something for you. Sibby, Sibby. Okay, bye.
Sorry, Mr. Call.
Just checking to see if you have a word or screwdriver. I'm meant to bring mine to tighten that door.
Oh, gotcha.
We'll do it tomorrow.
Okay. I think No, I don't-
It's gotta be a big, pretty good size one.
okay. Yeah, I don't think we have anything in the car.
I wind up probably just pulling them and putting new ones in. It's really stripped out.
I think I have a splinter in my finger. But I can't tell. Oh, never mind. I just got cut there.
It's a little black spot. That might just be dirt.
Yeah.
I would just wash it out really well.
But never mind, I'm mistaken.
Thanks for me.
Justin and Jennifer staying home today?
No, they're in the car finishing their breakfast.
Oh.
Cause they don't wanna get yelled at for eating in the sanctuary by Bill. But I don't care.
You don't care if they get yelled at?
sanctuary all the time.
Obviously. I'm looking at one of them right now.
And I still don't care. I'll go home if you want.
Only if you want to.
Did you find errors with that paperwork?
Well, there may have been a few numbers that were out of place, but in the end, it all equaled out to be good, so I'm just running with it.
So the totals were correct?
The totals are correct.
All right, good morning. Oh, let's see. Kenny, do you wanna open us up for this morning?
Father, good morning. Lord, we thank you that you saw it fit to let us see another day. And we ask that in this day that you would impart to us wisdom from the Word. Help us to understand history and its importance. Help us to understand just where we fit in your plan. Help us to be open and to be available and to hear when you call upon us. I ask that you would help us in this hour here to put the world aside and to focus on you. Pray for the other teachers and their classes. Help the students to know you in a more personal way than just knowing about you. Thank you, Father, in Jesus' name.
Been using laundry detergent with no scent, but I add some of my witch wife oils, her and her oils.
Would you call the priests witches because they use oils to anoint the Lord's chosen?
Didn't you know Martha and Mary were witches?
But I used hyssop this time and I'm not a fan of the smell.
Because it's meant for headaches.
Oh,
Is
it giving you a
Oh, it is.
Giving you a headache?
no. but
Fever, actually, fever.
It smells like I peed my
You
pants.
should ask your witch wife for recommendations.
What's wrong with smelling like I have new?
Okay. Am I good, Jeff? All right, quick recap. So Rome is having some issues.
What else is next?
So they're kind of in the decline. Strife between civilians and the legions. The Senate, Maximinius is the emperor at this point, or prior to this point, and he rules outside of Rome. He was a military general. He's elected as emperor by the Praetorian Guard. But he is very strict on those who are not of the legions. He was essentially a peasant and hated the upper class, essentially hated Rome. So he installed spies along the Roman territory to report on the coming and goings of governors. And finally, the Senate's had enough, so they elect their own emperors and name Maximinius enemy of the state. So they elect Papinius and Balbinus. Papinius will lead lead the military while Balbinus oversees the administrative duties back in Rome. The people aren't satisfied with their selection, so they petition to have another Gordian installed as emperor. So they agree. So Gordian III becomes the third emperor, co-emperor during this time period. So Maximinius marches south on Rome, but is met by one of the cities or towns that he comes through. That he has to, makes a big effort to ransack it, but the people, it's a very well fortified city, so they're able to repel him. He becomes very frustrated with the failings of his legion, not able to take the city, and so he begins heavily persecuting his own soldiers and ends up becoming very unfavorable by the legions, so they end up killing. So that leaves Balbinus and Pupianus and Gordian. And so Pupianus spends his time dealing with the encroaching northern Germanic tribes, while Balbinus is back in Rome trying to keep up with his duties. And after kind of settling things in the north, Pupianus enters back into Rome and finds it's in disarray and becomes frustrated with Balbinus. They end up clashing and divided, and eventually the Praetorian Guard enters into the palace with their unsatisfaction or their poor opinions of both emperors, and they execute both emperors, and that leaves Gordian III as sole emperor of Rome. And so Gordian III ends up marching. The Sassanids are making their kind of advancements from the east. So Gordian marches to the east to quash that. His Praetorian prefect, the individual that's essentially over the whole legions, ends up getting a disease and dies. So Gordian sets up one of his friends and governors, Decius, as the Praetorian prefect. And while Gordian sole emperor, he kind of laxes the edicts that are out against the Christians, so the persecution of Christians kind of subsides during Gordian's rule. He didn't elect Decius, that was my fault. He elects Philip the Arab as his Praetorian prefect. So if you remember, Philip was an Arab from the Damascus region, and in 244, Gordian ends up dying. It's kind of speculated as to how he died. One version is that he was poisoned by Philip. Another version is that he just died from natural causes. So Philip the Arab. Philip the Arab becomes emperor. He was speculated to be a Christian, but at the very least he was very sympathetic for the Christian movement. So he removed all edicts that were against the Christians. And then, if you remember, during this period, the Christian movement began building dedicated buildings for facilities for their meeting places. And so Shapur of the Sassanids ramps up their offensive against Rome to try and take back the Persian territory that they once had. Instead of meeting the Sassanids in battle. Philip pursues peace through, payment, and ultimately the legions obviously look down on this, and the fact that Philip has reduced their pay in an attempt to further gain funds in their treasury. So Philip's dishonorable peace with the Sassanids and his unwillingness to push up against the Goths, who were also kind of entered the scene during Philip's reign. So the Goths were just on around the region of the Black Sea. So they start advancing south against Rome, and so Philip also tries to pursue peace with them, and so the Praetorian Guard is not happy with that. So they wanted to replace Philip, and if you remember, there was a revolt in the legions that are dealing with the Germanic tribes, and they elect their own emperor. And one of the senators tells Philip, don't, because Philip was considering just resigning because he didn't want to lose his head, and so he would kind of peacefully hand over the position of emperor to this new, almost self-appointed emperor to the north. And one of the senators, tells Philip, hey, this revolt's only going to last a week. Don't worry about it. So sure enough, the revolt, the legions realize they made a mistake. They end up killing this, the individual that they set up as the would-be emperor. And so Philip becomes very close friends with this senator who is Decius, and so he essentially sends Decius up north to bring the legions kind of under control, try to quash the revolts. And during his time up there, Decius, gains favor partially of the legions and ends up winning, some skirmishes against the Germanic tribes. And so the legion decides, that they want to set up Decius as emperor. So they give him an ultimatum: either you become emperor and kill Philip, or we kill you and we'll find someone else. So Decius ultimately, decides to save his life. So he takes up the position and starts heading south to confront Philip.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So, if Philip had resigned, he would still be killed, right?
No, not necessarily. So it's speculation, but he could have, they may have just let him, work as within the Senate, or they may have just excommunicated him. That was pretty common, just to send him and his family out of Rome. So.
So he's the only one that wanted to resign.
No, there were a couple other emperors earlier on, prior to the Flavian dynasty, that didn't want the office, and would be more than happy with the position they had prior to emperor, but they were, ultimately forced into it. So, and those individuals ended up being a decent emperor. Imagine that, someone that doesn't want it. So Decius advances against Philip, and in 249, they face off in northern Italy, and Philip ends up losing him, and so he and his son are killed in battle. So Decius takes the reign. So Decius was of the Senate, came from the Senate. So he was more, he kind of, because of his relationship with the legions, he maintained, good relationships with them and the Senate. But he sends, upon advancing Rome, he sends his legions back up to the Danube, and he's, pondering why Rome is kind of entering in this chaotic era, and decides that it's, because we've forsaken the gods, so he reinstates the worship and sacrifices to the gods, and so he implements an edict for the whole, all citizens of Rome, that they're to sacrifice to the gods, which they'd be within 30 days, and they'd be issued a ticket to prove that they did so, as well as pronounce the emperor as Lord. So, as you can imagine, the Christians saw this as a threat, and so in the process, thousands of Christians were killed, or they decided to forego, following Christ, and gave in and offered up sacrifices. So this is when, I'll get back to that. So this is when we have another split along the main Christian movement, the Novatians. So Novatian comes from the main Christian movement. He's a presbyter in Rome, and so he debates with the bishop of Rome that those people that had left the faith and sacrificed to the gods, but wanted to return and enter into let's say a bishop wanted to return after forsaking God, he would not be allowed to take back that office, but the bishops decided that they could take back a position of authority, that they would be offered forgiveness. Novatian disagreed with that. He said, well, most of the history books say that Novatian went as far as saying that no one could return to the church, that if you, sacrificed to the gods, that there was no forgiveness offered. But speculation among some historians think that was an attempt to discredit Novatian, because they also wrote things like he beat his wife and caused her to have an abortion. So
completely unacceptable.
Justin.
it's speculation.
Oh, okay.
So, so we don't know, but we do know at the very least he did not agree with allowing those that left the faith to enter back into a position of authority. So he leaves church, starts up his own church, and so that's when we have the Novatians, another Anabaptist group. So that was in 250 AD. So once Novatian splits, him and his followers are named heretics by the Church of Rome, and so they are put outside the community of saints. So during Decius' reign, he engaged in battles against the Goths, and then in his last battle in 251, Decius and his army managed to push back the Goths into a retreat, or so he thought, and he and his army pursued the Goths, who had, by the way, just killed Decius' son in battle. And so they pursued the Goths into a swampy region, and where the Goths had set up an ambush point, And so when Decius and his armies reached the swamp, both he and his army were annihilated. So upon the death of Decius, both the army and the Senate were faced with the choice of who would become emperor. And so the army chose to elevate one of their own, and that would be Gaius Trebonianus. Gallus. And then we'll just call him Gaius, or Gallus, let's call him Gallus for short. And then Gaius Valens Hostilian Messius. So, AKA Hostilian.
It's weird, because the Encyclopedia Britannica has them two flipped
Oh,
in their order, you know, of reign.
yeah.
Neither here nor there. But I did have a question if I could ask you.
Sure.
Because I'm following along, like I said, it lists them all, and when I click on it, it gives a little spiel about it. I'm listening to you, I'm just looking at it, and each time there's a coin.
Mm-hmm.
So my question, and whether you can answer or not, I don't know, but it'd be interesting. Wonder if that coin was just commemorative, or if it had a monetary value? And if it had a monetary value, man, the minters were making coins like every other year.
Mm-hmm.
I think they did. I think
Yeah.
when a new sovereign came along, their face was on the money, and whether that was a 3-month period or a 10-year period, if you're a king, your face is on the money.
But I wonder if the money had any value if the guy before is dead, or 3 guys ago, you know. You're gonna have a whole lot of coins in 10, 15, 20
Right.
years.
This is a
Yeah.
Julius, and I need
Yeah.
a Gaius. This is not a
Yeah. Would they held the same value?
gold.
Probably
Is by
like-
weight.
I can actually answer that.
Go ahead.
They actually did hold the same value because the people who actually, the people, I'm looking for the word, the people who sold stuff.
Merchants?
The merchants, yes, thank you. They could tell by the weight, by the stamp, how pure the silver or the gold or whatever was minted on it, because every emperor had a different one. So you could see, even if you had Trebonius or Hostile Dude, like one might be purer than the other, it would be worth more than the other. The merchants knew, and they could even tell forgeries and stuff like that, or something that big. And a lot of times they would get the old coins, just remelt them back down, and then put new stamps on them. And a lot of time, and so with that, with every emperor, they got less and less valuable because they were adding more and more things to it, like nickel or copper or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah. In short, the monetary value of the coins was based on its material, not who was on it.
Gotcha.
Thank you. I guess I could have just said that.
It's crazy though, because it's, money is somewhat invisible nowadays,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to have a lot of coin in circulation in order to do business.
Back then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember watching Robin Hood, like the Disney Robin Hood when I was little. And when they robbed the caravan, and I'm like, who keeps all their money in a giant box like that? But it's like, I guess the treasury you kind of had to, because you didn't have credit cards.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Do they have bank notes yet? Like where you write on a piece of paper and that's the same? Or do you literally have to give them
That's a whole different history lesson, but they did, throughout history, even before the Roman Empire, they did have versions of that, essentially an IOU.
But in reality, I think that was all the taxes that they were collecting from the farmers hauling it. That's when Robin Hood got hold of it.
Disney Robin Hood? I'm sure is very historically.
Absolutely.
Are you talking the ones with bunnies? Yeah, those
And
are
foxes?
the most accurate out of all of them.
The phony king of England. There's a whiny lion who sucked his thumb.
Mommy.
So Trebonianus recognized that his election was essentially in opposition to the Senate's choice, and so it would more than likely cause another civil war, and so he addressed the Senate and said he would be willing to rule as co-emperor. So the Senate didn't take issue with this. because Trebonius was close with Decius, and Hostilian was still a teenager. So they agreed to this co-emperorship. So in addition to this, Trebonianus was an emperor of full Italian extraction, which hadn't existed since the fall of the Flavian dynasty, which would have been around, the end of the 90s AD. And so since then, the imperial office had been held by Spaniards, Africans, Thracians, and Arabs. And so while in office, Gallus was able to strike a peace deal with the Goths through payment, and the partnership between Gallus and Hostilian wouldn't last a year though. So in the summer of 251, Hostilian vanished from the historical records, but most historians agree that Hostilian fell prey to the advancing Cyprian plague. So the Cyprian plague is making its way west during this period. So that plague is named such because it was documented by Cyprian, who was a bishop at Carthage. He's probably listed as one of the popes, I think. And so that was off the coast of North Africa. And which, ironically, Cyprian was a Christian, or part of the main Christian movement. Most of what we know about Rome during this time period is because of him and his writings. In the past, usually it was a politician or someone from the upper class in Rome that would write about Rome and its history. But because Rome has entered in such a period of turmoil and is so unsettled that the amount of historical writings we have during this period is very minimal. And so Cyprian wrote about the symptoms, which were like, some of those symptoms were fever, vomiting, deafness, blindness, and filling of blood in the eyes. So it is speculated that this plague was either like smallpox, measles, or a Ebola-like virus. So this pandemic afflicted the Roman Empire between about 249 to 262 and originated in Ethiopia. And the plague lasted 20 years. The total number of deaths is unknown, but it was speculated that at the height, roughly 5,000 people a day died in Rome from it.
A day?
Yeah.
In just Rome?
Mm-hmm. In the Roman Empire, sorry. Not Rome itself, but
Still, that's
yeah. So at this point, Rome was being ravaged by external pressure, the Goths and the Sassanids. They had become stronger than Rome had known in centuries. There were also violent internal political divisions, economic depression, soaring taxation, and now a massive plague. So it was really just a perfect storm. So suddenly in 253, Shapur and the Sassanids invade Syria, and they taking key legionary garrisons and cities, including Antioch itself. So if you can imagine, if I go back here, this is the Roman Empire at its height, and this Antioch is right around here. So Shapur was able to basically take all of this territory of Rome and push it back.
Is that topographical?
Yes.
Those are huge mountains.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. I knew it was hilly and mountainous, but
Yeah,
I didn't
there's
realize that
some massive
drastic,
hills.
like,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
like plateau and then.
Yep. Oops. Go back. Where am I at? Yeah, right here. So Shapur's invading Syria. So in order to evade a response from Rome, so Shapur pushes him back to Antioch and then immediately retreats back into Persian territory. So he kind of learned his lesson in his previous battles, where he was pretty much humiliated by the Roman legions. So this time he knew that, you know, Rome would respond. You know, usually what Rome would do is they'd pull their legions from the north and the west to reinforce the legions in the east. So in order to counteract that, Shapur just conquered the area and then left. So, but he would later return. So Gallus didn't respond at all, except to order the legions in the area to shore up their defenses. So they essentially just left the territory unoccupied by Rome. And then Romans and the legions began to wonder if Gallus was becoming too content with the comforts of Rome, rather than acting as a general that he once was. So to add to this, in 253, the Gothics let it be known that they were unhappy about the payments they were promised, and if they didn't do anything about it, and the peace treaty would be null and void. So Gallus refused to respond to their threats, and so the Gothic army advanced across the Danube, but then they were defeated by Aemilianus and the legions. And so Aemilianus was an overnight sensation, and having done what two emperors failed to do, the legions honored their general the best way that they knew how. And so they proclaimed him emperor. So in response, Gallus requested that the Senate name Aemilianus an enemy of the state, and then marched to his defense to basically quash Aemilius' ambition. So he requests the Senate to name Aemilianus enemy of the state, but while Gallus was gathering his troops, Aemilianus was already marching on Italy. So he entered Italy, and it's unclear what exactly happened, but Gallus was murdered before Aemilianus reached Rome. Historians speculate that Gallus's legions basically defected, saw that Aemilianus was more powerful, had more support for the legions, so they defected from Gallus. So the death of Gallus ushered in the reign of Marcus Aemilianus.
I was just thinking, I was like, that's some
Oh, this is
voluminous
yeah,
hair.
wow.
He's gonna.
So he was greeted hesitantly by the Senate.
Oh. That didn't last long. Probably took longer to carve that sculpture.
So although appointed by the legions, so he was greeted hesitantly by the Senate, as Gallus, although appointed by the legions, was successful in preventing a civil war. That was Gallus. So here's a man who essentially took office by starting one. So Aemilianus went through great lengths to convince the senators to recognize his position as emperor. He told them that he saw himself only as a general, that he had neither the time or desire to be a political, economic, or moral leader of the empire, and that he would give the Senate that responsibilities. He said that his plan was to be used only as an instrument of war to the Senate. And so obviously the Senate gladly accepted his request, as they saw it was a partnership between civilian and military authorities. But almost immediately upon becoming emperor, Aemilianus marched back up to the Danube to control another general that was leading a revolt. That would be Valerian. And so the two armies met north of Italy, but Valerian's legion was significantly larger, and most of Aemilianus's men joined with Valerian's, and in the process, Aemilianus was cornered and killed by what were once his own men, and so there would be so the men, did this so that there would be no misunderstanding of where their legions lied. So enter Valerian. So Aemilianus ruled for roughly 1 month. So almost immediately upon donning the purple, Valerian had the Senate elevate his son Publius Ignatius Gallienus as co-emperor to oversee the Western Empire, as Valerian headed east to Syria to restore the legion that had been destroyed by the Sassanids. So Gallienus headed north to repel the Germanic incursion, which would continue to occur for over the next 20 years. Then, as reinforcements would be brought to the north to repel the Germanic invasion, then another region would notice the reduction in legions and would start their incursion, causing the region to pull the soldiers from their other regions. So, they pull legions from the area that were, going against the Gothics, and to bring them over to support the battles against the Germanic tribes. So then the Gothics would start, so then they'd bring legions back over here, and then the Germanic tribes would start advancing. So this would repeat until the local commander would be forced to shore up their defenses, and if he was successful, then his troops would name him emperor. So in history, you kind of, in this point in history, you kind of get these popping ups of, brief individuals who are named emperor by their troops.
Is this the best that we've got for a stone bust of this individual? Because it looks like his eyes were gouged out, and it took out his nose as well.
Yeah.
So
But the guy that was there for a month had like.
Yeah, look at the quality of that.
Like,
it's like, man. No, I'm sure there's other statues. So this cycle of troops setting up their commander as emperor would repeat. So civil wars, and then the Goths, on the other hand, waited for Valerian to pass on his way to deal with Syria before they began their invasion, but Valerian ignored them for now, as the Sassanids were a much bigger threat. So, on his way to deal with the Sassanids, Valerian just kind of ignores the Goths. And he was mainly concerned about Sassanids because they would have the ability to shut off the rich, taxed region of Syria, as well as the trade with Egypt, because Egypt is where Rome essentially got all of its food. So for the next several years, Valerian spent his time rebuilding Antioch and pushing the Roman border back east to its original location. And then eventually in 255, the Gothic invasion became too much to ignore, and so Gallienus was forced to march east to deal with them and was able to push them back across the Danube, but this left vacancy at the Germanic region, and eventually this region entered into chaos, leading Gallienus to march back west. So in order to try to keep order along the eastern Danube, Gallienus elevated his son, Valerian II, to the rank of Caesar. So now we have essentially three emperors. To the rank of Caesar to deal with the Gothics. And then the administration of that province was appointed to a general by the name of Ingenuus, who will be of interest here in the near future. So in 257, the invasion that Gallienus rushed back to deal with became serious enough that all three members of the imperial court headed to the region. So Valerian had at this point had rebuilt Antioch, and so he left the region to the charge of some of his subordinates while he headed west, but as soon as he left, the Sassanids made their move on Syria once again. So what made the invasion on the west so serious that even Valerian would leave one of the most important regions in Rome to go support was because of a super confederation of Germanic tribes that was forming. And this would be the first appearance of the Franks. So we have this kind of coalition of Germanic tribes that make up the Franks. And the Franks would be in time the reason why they call France France, and where a collection of Germanic tribes who lived along the lower Rhine River would locate. So among the Franks were the Batavians, who originated from the Netherlands, the Chatai from central Germany, and the Armanius, who were also from Germany, and then the Cherusci, who came from northwestern Germany. So over the years, the Germanic leaders realized that they were getting nowhere in fighting Rome when they were fighting amongst themselves, and so they put effort into establishing a relationship on a common goal of pushing back Rome. So France was made up of primarily Germanic tribes. So with all three emperors focused on the Franks, the rest of Rome would return to its natural state, which was chaos. So the Gothics would establish a fleet in the Black Sea that would be used to invade further into Asia Minor. Eventually, the emperors were able to contain the Franks, and Valerian headed east, ignoring the Gothics once again, as he would assign Valerian II to deal with them. So he heads east again to deal with Shapur and his advancing army into Roman territory. Then when Valerian reached east, for some reason he chose this time to revive Roman persecution of the Christians, which would lead to the death of Saint Cyprian in 258. So Cyprian was the individual that, provided historical writings on Rome in the Cyprian disease. So all in there. We'll pick up next week with the ascension of the next emperor. And so we have basically in relation to the Christian movement, Valerian essentially elevates significantly the persecution of Christians, and then we start seeing a progression to a emperor that is going to basically just decimate the Christian movement, or try to. So, all right. Any comments or questions?
When did they start using CE instead of AD in numbering years? Any idea?
I'd have to look into that. I don't know.
Because I kept saying CE, so I looked it up. Common Era versus the year of our Lord.
Well, that's the secular version of AD.
Okay. Never noticed it until this morning.
Was there any information on why all of a sudden the increased persecution of Christians, or?
No. No. Because, again, the writings about what's going on in Rome here are very minimal. I mean, what I've read is, they speculate it's because they, one of the reasons is because they didn't trust the Christians. They wouldn't claim the emperor as Lord, so they felt like they were an untrustworthy citizen of Rome. I'm trying to think of some of the other reasons. I can't remember off the top of my head.
Well, have the Christians been basically persecuted for the last several rulers at this point in
No.
time?
So I'm looking for
No.
somebody else who may be worth a little more.
Because the only thing I could think of would be that, with the empires from the east coming in and pushing out the Romans, that also the Christians would be like,
Yeah.
well, we're not getting persecuted by these guys, so.
Yeah. Oh, that was I think that was one of the other speculations, is because, there was a large population of the Christian movement within the Sassanid Empire, so, another reason why he mistrusted them. That thought that they supported the Sassanid Empire, not the Roman Empire, so. All right. That's all I got today.